Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering college diversity fraud caught plagiarizing. It's not just Claudine Gay. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from Zero Hedge, entirely counterfeit. Harvard's chief diversity officer plagiarized at least 40 times, according to a complaint. From the Washington Free Beacon, not just Claudine Gay, Harvard's chief diversity officer plagiarized and claimed credit for husband's work, complaint alleges. And from The Root, another black woman in trouble at Harvard, and surprise, surprise, she's head of diversity. An anonymous complaint was allegedly filed against the school's first chief diversity officer this week. How could something like this happen? Well, they made enemies with Bill Ackman. From Bloomberg, Bill Ackman slams Harvard endowment, forms think tank to probe higher education. What's a think tank? Well, it's a group of people, well compensated, to go after problems, study problems. In this case, they're literally going after problems. But this may not even be Bill Ackman. Chris Rufo is also after Harvard. From Bloomberg, to continue his scrutiny of anti-Semitism and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies on U.S. campuses, Bill Ackman plans to form a team that will go after these issues in a very aggressive way. With his new think tank, Ackman is poised to deploy familiar tactics on unfamiliar targets. At Pershing Square Capital Management, his company, he used a scorched earth approach to activist investing that resulted in both big wins and shattering losses. Quote, "It's going to be a think and do tank," he said. "We're going to study these issues and come up with solutions to problems, and we're going to implement them." He said he's not worried about the backlash against his stance and told people who don't like his views that they shouldn't follow him on social media. Quote, "I'm not afraid of being canceled," he said. "I'm not afraid of losing my job, and financial independence gives me the wherewithal to speak." Ackman has a personal net worth of $2.5 billion, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. And Bill Ackman isn't the only one now out there gunning for these people who don't belong in positions of power if they didn't get there the right way, especially when they're abusing that power. Of course they're going to get thrown out. From the Washington Free Beacon, not just Claudine Gay, Harvard's chief diversity officer plagiarized and claimed credit for husband's work, complaint alleges. Harvard University's chief diversity and inclusion officer, Sherry Ann Charleston, appears to have plagiarized extensively in her academic work, lifting large portions of text without quotation marks and even taking credit for a study done by another scholar, her own husband, according to a complaint filed with the university on Monday and a Washington Free Beacon analysis. And this is an anonymous complaint that someone filed, citing where she plagiarized and where she plagiarized it from. The complaint is anonymous because with an anonymous complaint, you can avoid being targeted by your enemies. It makes it very difficult to stop someone who is anonymously filing complaints. Expect to see a lot of that. The complaint makes 40 allegations of plagiarism that span the entirety of Charleston's thin publication record. In her 2009 dissertation, submitted to the University of Michigan, Charleston quotes or paraphrases nearly a dozen scholars without proper attribution, the complaint alleges. And in her sole peer-reviewed journal article, co-authored with her husband, LeVar Charleston, in 2014, the couple recycled much of a 2012 study published by LeVar Charleston, the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, framing the old material as new research. I know what you're thinking. Oh, no, you didn't. And the answer is, oh, yes, she did. Through that sleight of hand, Sherry Ann Charleston effectively took credit for her husband's work. The 2014 paper, which was also co-authored with Gerlando Jackson, now the Dean of Michigan State University's College of Education, and appeared in the Journal of Negro Education, has the same methods, findings, and description of survey subjects as the 2012 study, which involved interviews with Black computer science students and was first published by the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. The two papers even report identical interview responses from those students. The overlap suggests that the authors did not conduct new interviews for the 2014 study, but instead relied on LeVar Charleston's interviews from 2012. and that's a severe breach of research ethics, according to experts who reviewed the allegations. Quote, the 2014 paper appears to be entirely counterfeit, said Peter Wood, the head of the National Association of Scholars and a former associate provost at Boston University, where he ran several academic integrity probes. Quote, this is research fraud pure and simple. Sherry Ann Charleston was the chief affirmative action officer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison before she joined Harvard in August 2020 as its first ever chief diversity officer. In that capacity, Charleston served on the staff advisory committee that helped guide the university's presidential search process that resulted in the selection of former Harvard President Claudine Gay in December 2022, according to the Harvard Crimson. A historian and attorney by training, Charleston has taught courses on gender studies at the University of Wisconsin, according to her Harvard bio, which describes her as, quote, one of the nation's leading experts in diversity. The site says that her work involves translating diversity and inclusion research into practice for students, staff, researchers, postdoctoral fellows, and faculty of color. Experts who reviewed the allegations against Charleston said that they range from minor plagiarism to possible data fraud and warrant an investigation. Some also argued that Charleston had committed a more serious scholarly sin than Gay, Harvard's former president, who resigned in January after she was accused of lifting long passages from other authors without proper attribution. Papers that omit a few citations or quotation marks rarely receive more than a correction, but when scholars recycle large chunks of a previous study, especially its data or conclusions, without attribution, the duplicate paper is often retracted and can even violate copyright law. That offense, known as duplicate publication, is typically a form of self-plagiarism in which authors republish old work in a bid to pad their resumes. Here, though, the duplicate paper added two new authors, Sherry Ann Charleston and Gerlando Jackson, who had no involvement in the original, letting them claim credit for the research and making them party to the con. Quote, Sherry Charleston appears to have used somebody else's research without proper attribution, said Steve McGuire, a former political theory professor at Villanova University, who reviewed both the 2012 and the 2014 papers. 1/5 of the 2014 paper, including 2/3 of its findings, was published in the 2012 study, according to the complaint, and 3 interview responses are identical in both articles, suggesting they come from the same survey. According to Lee Jussum, a social psychologist at Rutgers University, quote, it is essentially impossible for 2 different people in 2 different studies to produce the same quote. At best, he said, the authors got their wires crossed and mixed up interviews from 2 separate surveys, both of which happened to involve 37 participants with the exact same demographic profile. At worst, the authors committed data fraud by framing old survey responses as new ones, a separate and more serious offense. Monday's complaint, which was filed anonymously, comes as Harvard is facing questions about the integrity of its research affiliates and the ideology of its diversity bureaucrats, most of whom report to the sprawling office that Sherry Ann Charleston oversees herself. The Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, one of Harvard Medical School's 3 teaching hospitals, announced in January that it would retract 6 papers and correct dozens more after some of its top executives were accused of data manipulation. That news came on the heels of a viral essay in which Carol Hooven, a Harvard biologist, described how she's been hounded out of a teaching role by her department's diversity committee after she said in an interview that there are only 2 sexes. The school is also facing an ongoing congressional probe over its handling of anti-Semitism and its response to the plagiarism allegations against Gay, which Harvard initially sought to suppress with legal saber-rattling. Half of Gay's published work contained plagiarized material, ranging from single sentences to entire paragraphs, with some of the most severe lifts coming from her dissertation. Though Gay stepped down as president on January 2nd, she remains a tenured faculty member drawing a $900,000 annual salary. Some of Charleston's offenses are similar to Gay's. In her 2009 dissertation, for example, Charleston borrows a sentence from Eric Arnson's 1991 book, Waterfront Workers of New Orleans Race, Class, and Politics, 1863 to 1923, without quotation marks and without citing Arneson's work in a footnote. She also lifts full paragraphs from her thesis advisor, Rebecca Scott, while making minimal semantic tweaks. Quote, there's simply not enough difference to consider them original words, said Jonathan Bailey, the founder of the website Plagiarism Today. Quote, though the sources in those examples are cited, Charleston includes a footnote to Scott at the end of each passage. The text either needed to be quoted or properly paraphrased. Bailey added that the plagiarism of Scott alone merited an investigation, ideally, he said, quote, by a neutral party with no ties to either the school or the school's critics. Charleston also lifted language from Luis Perez, an historian at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Alejandro de la Fuente, an historian at Harvard, and Ada Ferrer, an historian at New York University, among other scholars. Charleston cites each source in a footnote, but omits quotation marks around language copied verbatim. The omissions violate Harvard's Guide to Using Sources, a document produced for incoming students, which states that quotation marks are required when you copy language word for word. The range of examples presented in the complaint, which was also filed to the University of Michigan and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, highlights how plagiarism can shade into more severe forms of misconduct when it involves interviews or other data. In fact, some experts said the plagiarism didn't quite capture the dishonesty of duplicate publication, which is sometimes categorized as a separate offense and accounts for 14% of all paper retractions in the life sciences. Quote, you cannot just republish an old paper as if it's a new paper, Jussum, the Rutgers psychologist, said. If you do, that's not exactly plagiarism, it's more like fraud. Wood said the case was really a combination of the two offenses. Quote, because the second paper, on which Sherry Ann Charleston is one of the 3 co-authors, recycles so much of the text of the original paper by LeVar Charleston, this does not have the earmarks of plagiarism, but the plagiarism is compounded by an even larger effort to deceive, he said. The universities and journals need to investigate. While scholars can reuse data across multiple papers, they must make clear when they are doing so and provide the appropriate attribution to earlier studies per guidelines from the Office of Research Integrity and the editorial policies of top academic journals, including Nature and Cell. But the 2014 paper never indicates that it is reusing research from 2012. Instead, it claims to present new data that fill a gap in the literature and corroborate the 2012 study, among others, and on 2 occasions refers to survey subjects as participants in this study. Those participants appear to be the same people whom LeVar Charleston interviewed in 2012. Both surveys involve the same number of undergraduates, graduate students, PhDs, and students at historically black colleges, all drawn from the same computer science conference, a similarity that experts said was a red flag. Quote, it is curious that the proportions are identical, said Deborah Weber-Wolf, a German computer scientist who researches plagiarism and other forms of academic misconduct. This would be grounds for the universities in question to request the data and investigate. Jussum agreed. Quote, this seems sufficiently improbable that absent something saying they are re-reporting an already published study, it would be fraud, he said. LeVar Charleston did not respond to a request for comment about whether the 2 studies used the same interviews. The University of Michigan said it was, quote, committed to fostering and upholding the highest ethical standards in research and scholarship, but declined to comment on the complaint. Both articles are littered with the tropes of progressive scholarship, including a disclaimer about positionality. The authors assure readers that they reflected on their own racial, gender, and socioeconomic status, and a lament that computer science is a white male-dominated field. Both also criticize the idea that, quote, computing sciences is for nerds, only for white people, and only for geniuses. Such language is typical of the diversity initiatives Charleston oversees. Since 2020, her office has pumped out a stream of materials that bemoan the, quote, weaponization of whiteness, discuss the ins and outs of white fragility, and urge students to call out their peers for harmful words. One message signed by Charleston herself was titled A Call to Dismantle Intersecting Oppressions. Quote, we must continue to work against systematic oppression in all its forms, racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and more, she wrote. Her office also curates resources for students seeking to become fluent in progressive patois, including a glossary of diversity, inclusion, and belonging terms that provides examples of gaslighting. Tactics can include shooting down the target's ideas, the entry reads, or taking credit for them. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.